for a coach, it's much more about giving. So I think for me, coaching at this level, what I found is how much I need to prepare, to plan, and be prepared to give to players, to be able to make sure you give the players the best opportunity to be the best they can be. I think that's really important. I don't think we've ever been more connected, but are probably more lonely. We've got all this information. We've got so much information at our fingertips. I think the skill is how you use the information, how you connect with the players. Players' careers go quickly. So he always say to me, I want you to be the best you can be because the player deserves it. So I think for me, it's about letting a player know that I genuinely care about him as a person first. The relationship's built on trust. So I think that's, just be a good human first.
Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode here on the Coach G Show. Today's episode is for coaches who want to understand what elite coaching really demands. My guest has coached at the highest level of the game across England, Australia, and now Japan, under immense pressure in different cultures and alongside some of the most demanding leaders in world rugby. This isn't just a career walkthrough. This is a deep conversation about leadership, trust, communication, pressure, and what it actually takes to survive and thrive as a professional coach. If you're a coach who wants to grow, lead better, and operate at the highest level, this episode is for you. Let's get stuck into it. Neal, thank you for joining us. How are things going?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. So, good. It's been a busy year from a test point of view, but just enjoying a little bit of a break now. So thank you. All good.
Okay, awesome. Neal, we all know it's important to take a break from coaching from time to time. And when I use the words under pressure, that's more about, that's the highest level. We are constantly under pressure. We need to perform. So what have you been up to during the break?
A little bit of everything. We finished in November the game against Georgia. So I went back to the UK. I went in to spend some time with Johan van Graan, first of all, at Bath, awesome. Which was great. He's doing a fantastic job there. Team's going really well. Then I just got working down the coast, starting in Cape Town. I flew out to South Africa, working down the coast. Just a bit of traveling, reconnecting friends and family. Like you said, just nice to get a bit of downtime. And then I'm back up in Cape Town at the moment. I was actually in with the Stormers on the 31st. I went in. I know Dobbo pretty well, so it was brilliant to actually go in and spend a day with the Stormers in their build up to the Bulls game this weekend, which obviously an ex-Bull yourself. So and I'm looking forward to a big North-South derby.
It's going to be quite intense. I saw they brought in the cavalry with the Springbok coaches. I'm surprised that you haven't been brought in by the Stormers. It looks like we're starting a new trend here, bringing international coaches in.
Look, I think they're doing Dobbo's doing a pretty good job there. I think, the coaches are doing a good job there, aren't they?
Now, I'll be honest, I always make fun of it, being a full-on Bull, the Stormers was probably one of the teams I deeply hate, all right, and I really despised them back in the days, but I respect the whole of their coaching staff and, what the Stormers have achieved over the years as well. Back in my day, they were really a force to be reckoned with, and it's great to see what they are creating as well. Really still have some strong relationships with some of the Stormers coaching staff and players. Neal, the reason I wanted to get onto this podcast, firstly, thanks you for joining us and joining me. And you have an amazing career as a coach. You've worked in different environments, and I don't think people realize, what it takes from us as coaches at the highest level. You've coached with England, Australia, and Japan, and each environment was unique, and we are under pressure consistently. But in your mind, what does elite coaching actually demand of a human being, which our audience doesn't really see?
I think it's probably, if you look at it as a player, I think as a player, and I mean this in the best possible way, as a player, you need to be reasonably selfish, not towards your teammates or in games, but you need to understand, how do you prepare best? What does it take for you to be your best in the week, etc. So there's a certain amount of good selfish behavior, whereas for a coach, it's much more about giving. So I think for me, coaching at this level, what I found is how much I need to prepare, to plan, and be prepared to give to players. Um, I'm sort of gobsmacked continually having, like you said, England, Australia, Japan. One of the big commonalities is how much the players want to get better. So being at my best to be able to make sure you give the players the best opportunity to be the best they can be, I think that's really important. So that planning and preparation for me is huge.
Yeah, it's massive. I'll always tell the audience as well, being professional coaches, the time we spend doing analysis, doing prep work, and we don't basically have weekends, and
Yeah.
even with the international periods, it's quite intense for you guys. And tell me, are there times where you feel like, listen here, maybe as coaches, we are maybe spending too much time on the analysis, becoming a bit too obsessed on the information we are sharing? We've had so many guests on this podcast, and we was talking about information overload, especially with the new generation, taking into consideration the attention spans and also what they've been exposed to over the last decade.
Yeah, I think I'm probably I'm fortunate in that way, in that I've got no social media profile. Everyone keeps telling me I need to get Instagram or do these sort of things, but I don't think we've ever, if this makes sense, I don't think we've ever been more connected, but are probably more lonely. We've got all this information. We've got so much information at our fingertips. But you've been fortunate to work with some brilliant players and coaches. What I see, the coaches that do well, and I've been fortunate to work with guys like, Eddie Jones, Steve Borthwick, and then have connections with other coaches. The coaches that I see do really well, people like Gary Gold, guys like that are people who connect with players. So you've got all this information. I think the skill is how you use the information, how you connect with the players first and foremost, how you get them to buy into what you're doing. And then it's about cherry picking that information. What information does this guy need? What information does this team need? And then how you best use that information. So I think you spot on there, Guthrie. I think there's so much information, and to give it all out would be a complete overload. If you think how simple it was probably when you were playing, and even simpler when I was playing long before you, I just think the skill is in using what the player needs and not what you think he needs.
Yeah. Well, I had Nyani Shimangi on the podcast, and we were talking back in the day when Rassi just became coach. He was our coach of the Cheetahs, and we used to have this thick binders of information, and our video sessions lasted about 2.5 hours, and we had to buy sandwiches and Cokes and chips and just to keep us awake during those video sessions. So times have changed, but we're going to dive into that a little bit deeper. But I do believe, Neal, you've coached across borders, different continents, countries, and I believe you have like a wealth of experience. But I do believe it's your earlier days that kind of molded you and helped me, because you have been labeled by your peers as a super communicator, somebody that is capable of inspiring players and connecting players. So that just speaks loads of the person and the human being that you are. But take us through your earlier days, your younger days. If I'm not mistaken, you were born in England and then you moved to, back in the day, Rhodesia and South Africa. If you can take us a bit through your journey.
No problem. Born in England. My folks moved out really early. Moved to Rhodesia as it was then. And I never, I didn't play rugby at all. My dad was a big rugby league fan from the north of England. So I played football, cricket. I played as many sports as I could. Wasn't very good at athletics and running, but I tried all sorts of different things: swimming, water polo. So I think having a good cross section of sports really helped me later on in life. My folks moved after independence. Rhodesia became Zimbabwe. We stayed there for a while, and then my dad moved us up to the old Transkei.
Okay.
So we lived in Transkei where he got work. But I actually went to school at a school called Dale College in the Eastern Cape. So what was then a really strong rugby school. We had, I think, about 650 boys with 12 open rugby teams. And my first year was in hostel. I was in what they call then Standard 7. And if you made the third team rugby, you got to have hot showers in the evening. So, in the cold of winters in the Eastern Cape, hot showers pretty cool. So that's how I got into rugby. I started to play rugby because it meant I could get a hot shower in winter. That was the driving force initially. So that's when I started playing. I played fullback, an 8th man, and slowly worked my way forward into loosehead prop. So I started at Dell College. I was fortunate enough to play Craven Week 87, 88. Then I moved down to Durban. I played in some unbelievable rugby teams with some of the greats of South Africa rugby. I was coached by Ian Mack, who you'll know. And I started off initially with giants, guys like Luit Miller, Rudy Fasaki, Val Bartman, a very young Gary Teichman, Josh Stransky, Dickie Muir, people like this. So I think my career bordered amateur into professionalism. I think that, I'm sure everybody wants to earn money for every year that you play, but when I look back on it now, how fortunate I was, my sort of career transcended amateurism into professionalism, 95, 96, 97. So I played for the Sharks. I moved down to Cape Town when Harry Viljoen was coaching. And then really got Joel moved overseas, Joel Stransky, and he was playing for Leicester, and he was he phoned me. I bumped into him the one day, and he said, look, you should have a look at maybe playing in the UK. And I actually joined a club called Bedford, who were coached at the time by Rudy Straley. So Rudy was there. There are quite a few South Africans, a guy called Sean Platford, a lock who played quite a bit for Natal. Heinz Flugler, who played for Transvaal Natal as a fullback. So I joined Bedford. I signed initially for 2 years. I just bought a house in Cape Town. Wanted to try and make some money and pay the house off quickly. And ended up staying. So I played at London Irish for nearly 12 years. I played over 250 games for the club, and then was fortunate enough that the club moved me straight into a coaching capacity. I joined the academy. So I ran the academy for probably 2 or 3 years. But in that time, the forwards coach, a guy called Toby Booth, he asked me to sort of do some of the coaching with a scrum. So that's where scrum coaching started. And I did that for a while. And then Gary, who we mentioned a bit earlier, Gary's a long-time friend. And Gary got the job at Bath Rugby, head coach, and wanted me to join him at Bath, which was an absolute no-brainer. I think for me, it was a bit of a sleeping giant, but I love my time at London Irish, and it was an unbelievable club. But I've always been driven by working with good people, not just good clubs or good. I wanted to work with good people, and Gary's one of the best humans I know. So it was a no-brainer for me. I joined Gary there. And it was from there I got approached to go with England with Eddie. So I worked with Eddie for the first time from 2016 to 2019. We did obviously the World Cup into the final, where unfortunately we lost. It was probably just the beginning of this, the powerhouse that South Africa has become at the moment. So that was that 2019, that period leading into that. Went back to Bath, started coaching there again. Johan van Graan came and joined. So again, I wanted to work with Johan because everyone had told me, just as a human, what a good bloke he is. I think you would have worked with him a little bit, wouldn't you, in some capacity?
Yeah, I did. I worked with Johan when he started out. He started out as our video analyst, and then boom, one season he became my formats coach, and what a man. So I've worked with him probably for a good decade, to be honest with you.
Yeah. So I only did the 1 year with Johan. It was a brilliant year. I sort of transitioned from a head coach role into assistant coach role, sort of went down instead of going up. And he was brilliant. I can't speak highly enough of him, and he was great for me. And then Eddie gave me a call and said, look, I've got the Australia job. Would you be interested? And again, as a player and as a coach, I'd been in the Premiership for a long, long time. And it was just starting to feel a little bit like Groundhog Day, where it's same games, same venues. And there's a guy called Neil Craig. He said something to me, and actually Rob Wagner reminded of me the other day when I was in with the Stormers, and that's, if you want to get better, seek discomfort. So just do something. Don't just stay and do the same job. Do something a bit different. So I decided to take up the offer to go to Australia. And that was a tough job, but something I enjoyed, good men. So yeah, I did that for a year. We struggled at the World Cup. Eddie left. I think it's quite, everybody knows the sort of story behind that, and Eddie decided to leave. I moved back to the UK, not sure what was next. And then out of the blue, got another phone call from Eddie saying, look, I've got the Japan job. I want you to come to Japan. So I spoke to my family, and we decided that the best thing to do would be to move lock, stock, barrel to Japan. If you want to do the job, do it properly. Don't dip in and out. That's fine for other people. But for me, the role that I had, I wanted to make sure that I saw the players. You talked a bit earlier how important the relationship with the players was. I want to be able to go into the clubs and see the players, even with the help of a translator, to be able to speak to guys and let them know, we're here. We want you to be the best players you can be. So yeah, I've been with Japan for the last 2 years. So it's been a real interesting journey. And there's still obviously, hopefully, lots to go. But yeah, I feel very privileged and very blessed with the amount of places that I've been able to see, and the people that I've been able to work with.
No, that's awesome. Thanks. And now it's going to be my job to dive in a bit deeper. Congratulations on everything that you achieved. And, it's great to see that, I've worked with Eddie Jones in 2007. We've always kept unbelievable relationship, respect the hell of him. I don't care what the media says and what people say. But it's a great man. He's a unbelievable human being, and really looking forward to connect with him in the future as well. But I want to ask you this. I do believe, playing in South Africa and also playing in the UK gave you a lot of experience, and it definitely played a massive role into you becoming the coach that you are today, and helping you to manage, coaching across borders and in different cultures. Were there any key influences in your early playing days, playing in South Africa, whether it was certain players or coaches that really played a massive role that kind of helped you to push that needle and, become a better player?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, you'll know how strong people who haven't lived in South Africa don't understand the importance of schoolboy rugby, or just how big schoolboy rugby is in South Africa. So, like I said, I played at a really big rugby school. We had a coach called Kenny Ball, who I still speak to today. I think he is one of the biggest influences I had. He was an ex-scrum half who loved scrums, loved forward play. So, he is a huge influence on my career. We didn't get on at first, and then I could see he just wanted me to be the best player I could be. So someone like him now, like I said, I got a text from him the other day. When we play big games, I get messages from him. So he was an unbelievable influence, just because he wanted us, again, just, train hard, work hard, enjoy yourself. His training sessions were really tough, but they were fun. So he's a guy that I've got a huge amount of respect for. I'm just trying to think the other guys. Ian Mack. Ian Mack was unbelievable for me, a bit more hierarchical. In terms of, as a young guy coming in, you earn your stripes, you carry the bags, you do all the, all the ugly work at the airports, carrying bags for all the senior players. And, Mac was big on that. But the players loved him. I can't think of a single player I've ever spoken to who didn't love playing for Mac. Dickie Muir as a player, because there weren't, he was probably the slowest center in world rugby ever. But the fittest, and the hardest working, and again, just an unbelievably good bloke who I remember going into the Natal team room, with, like I said to you a bit earlier, Val Bartman, Rudy Fasalki, these giants of South African rugby, and Dick making me feel at home, like that in the first minute. And I didn't realize at the time, but just how important those people were across the change rooms, guys that have an ability to make a young man, who's going into an environment with these ridiculously big Springboks, and just made me feel comfortable. Not comfortable, that's probably the wrong word, but just made me feel at ease, that I could be myself. And I think that for me is probably something that the lessons I learned off Dick, when young guys came, when I was at London Irish or I became a senior player, was to try and make young men feel that they belonged. It's such an important skill, and Dickie, I'll always be grateful to him for it. He made me feel like I belonged in that Natal training room, which gave me huge belief in what I could do. So, yeah, Kenny Ball, Mac, Dickie Muir, Gary at London Irish and at Bath. I got my first coaching job from a guy called Toby Booth, who showed a lot of faith in me. And I'll be grateful for that. But Gary always encouraged me just to be who I am. I haven't hired you, haven't brought you here to be someone different. Be who you are. Connect with the players. So Gary, and then probably Eddie. Eddie's he's different to all of them. He's tough on the coaches, again, because I think he's tough on the coaches because he wants the players to have the best experience possible. Your playing career might be as an international, 5, 6 years, if you're lucky, 10, 11 years. And it goes quickly, players' careers go quickly. So he always say to me, I want you to be the best you can be because the player deserves it. And I think as a player, I would have loved for playing for a coach like that who was demanding so much excellence from everyone around him because he wanted to give the player the best opportunity to achieve. So you pick up little lessons, little bits here and there from those. But those are probably the main guys, I think, in my career. And a guy, I don't know if you remember a guy called Gerard Harding. So, and yeah, he's an old school prop. He played left head and tight head for the Sharks. When I was sort of coming through, you sat a lot of games on the bench. It wasn't their tactical substitutions. It was only if you injured, you came off. You only had one prop on the bench. So I had to cover both sides. And Gerard was a senior guy who put a lot of time into me, when he didn't need to. He spent a lot of time with me just engaging on a personal level, and then helping me with my scrum, helping me around the park. So he was unbelievable for me, a really good guy. Who played quite a lot of rugby in a successful team with the Sharks, Natal as they were then. Probably didn't get the recognition that he always deserved, but he was a stalwart in that side and a real connector in the group. So I learned a lot of Gerard. Yeah.
There's two things I want to touch base on, and it comes down to your ability as an experienced player back then to accommodate the youngsters. That is crucial. I remember back in the day as a young player at the Cheetahs, all of a sudden you're playing with guys like Naka Drotsky, Andre Venter, Rassie Erasmus, all these guys, and Toki Kasselman back in the day was a legend of the game as well, and Kennedy Timber. And I remember how Rassie, he made us feel welcome, being this massive Springbok, and, like we really idolized him and his ability to make us just feel as part of the guys. You're a youngster, you're 21 years old, and all of a sudden, and that is so important. And I had that same conversation with Conrad Smith, legend of the All Blacks, and he said on the podcast, you know what, G, in our team, we had these superstars. We had Richie McCaw, we had Dan Carter, we had Man Nonu. So when younger players would come into the All Blacks setup, they would almost be overwhelmed and starstruck. And he said, my job was to show them, listen, guys, I'm not a superstar. I'm just Conrad, I'm just a simple guy. And his role was like to balance that team out, accommodating the younger players, which is brilliant. And that is great that you mentioned that because, I do believe in the construction of a team, you do need different types of leaders, which is key. Yeah. But what I would like to ask you about is with Eddie. A lot of people, they have a lot of misconceptions about him. I have a lot of respect for him as a coach and as a human being. But what makes Eddie Jones really great and great at his job?
Yeah. Just as you're talking about those players there, Conrad Smith, those sort of guys. Vol Bartman, if I come back one step, Vol Bartman, again, was this superhuman Springbok. He made me feel welcome, but he demanded. Even then, when it was still amateur to a degree, his level of demand was so high. Like, if you're in the squad, welcome, we loved having you here, but the level of demand, he made that expectation so clear. And I think that's probably something that Eddie does better than anyone I've ever seen or ever worked with. There's a clear demand on expectation. So whether it's been for England, for for Japan, for Australia. Eddie will sit down with the coaches and he'll go, this is what I expect. I expect standards to be red hot across all levels, not just on the first day of camp, but on the first day of camp and on the last day of tour. So I think he has an unbelievably high level of demand and level of expectation on standards. Don't let anything drop ever. I'll probably get a few blokes messaging me afterwards taking the mic, but I think what he says is, what you walk past, be prepared to accept. So if you're prepared to walk past things and to not have a good lift or a good engage, then you'll get it in a game. So don't ever let standards drop. I think that's something that he does so well. He's really clear, really high expectation on standards, and I think he's not afraid to change his mind. We've had conversations on players and selections and on how you want to play or how you want to scrum, and you can't just sort of bullshit your way through. It can't just be smoke and mirrors, because you'll dive into the detail. Really push buttons on the detail and why are you doing it? Well, how's it going to make us better? Explain more to me. So he doesn't just go, okay, look, that's fine, let's give it a go. He wants to know to the nth degree how it's going to improve us as a team. So I think he does that better than anyone. He has lots of information. He speaks to everyone. He spent some time, I saw the other day, chatting to Jesse Creel. 2 hours with Jesse Creel. It's something he does so well, as he speaks to everybody, all sports. We were in tour in America now, and he had guys from the Golden State Warriors in, and Vern Gambetta, who's this renowned S&C coach. So he just takes information from everywhere. And he's really prepared to listen and to try different things. For a guy whom people might think is really set in his ways, he's really prepared to rip things up and change. And I like that about him. It's not just, we're just going to do this. He'll rip things up and try. Sometimes it doesn't work and we get it wrong. But I think it's worse to do nothing, just to try and stay on the same course. So I think those are probably the things from a coaching point of view. And he's really, is big, really important for you to establish relationship with the players. Know your players. He'll drive that in the coaches every week. Get to understand your players, know your players. What's his why for playing? Why does he do it? Why does he want to be the best? So he's, really good around those little bits. Obviously the rugby is important, but how you interact with the players, how you try and become better yourself every day is just next level to anyone I've ever worked with.
Yeah, it makes sense. You're saying that level of demand, and that standards, and that's the key to any successful team. And coaches that have been consistent across the board for so many years, decades, that's one of their key traits. And we had this discussion as well with Basil Karsis as well, my former S&C coach at the Bulls. And when I asked him, in terms of the coaching staff, I experienced that the golden years of the Bulls as a player, but I asked him, listen, what was the key message coming through? And at the end of the day, he mentioned that Heineke Meyer said, I want world-class players and then some. He said, so the standard was world-class plus. Those were the standards. And the theme that came through was constantly about pushing the standards. And I think that's important. What a lot of players today don't realize is that a lot of them are unbelievably talented. And obviously you do have the players that are very meticulous in their preparation, but what players don't realize sometimes that one session, if you're just going through the motions, that's an opportunity lost and it will reflect in your game. We always say you play the way you train, and also you got to prepare to perform. But I want to touch on this next topic because I do believe this is important, and I think this is one of your superpowers, your ability to connect with players. We do see this is getting more and more tricky. It's obviously different in an international level. You got players that are fully committed because they're playing for their country. So, they will do whatever. That's something which I've picked up spending time with different teams. But we do realize that when you're playing in a club environment, whether it's in the Premiership or in South Africa, or whether it's in France, speaking to coaches and all the different competitions and different teams and different cultures, it does seem to be a common theme in terms of the new generation is a bit different. But what I would like to ask you, what is your key as a coach? No matter which culture you are involved in or environment, what is the key to connecting with players and earning their trust?
It's a brilliant question. Hey, thanks for the question. Especially now, like as players get younger, you get older. You're at a much different stage of your career. So, like I said, I got no social media profile. So guys talk to me about TikTok and all sorts of things. I haven't got a clue what they're talking about or what that looks like. So, there's obviously the generational gap which you need to understand. But I think I always go back to when I was playing. Like what was important for me was the coach who had a genuine interest in me. Didn't just walk past, hey, how's everything going, and then almost walk off before I've even answered. Who would sit down and look at me and go, how's everything? How's everything going? How can we help? What can we do? Listen, I've noticed this about your game. Coaches who were honest with me, and everyone talks about honesty. Everyone talks about world-class standards. Everyone talks about honesty, but there's so few environments that live that and who live it consistently. You could probably count them on one hand. So it's something that everybody talks about a lot, and they don't get it wrong because it's not important. It's just tough to do every day. So I think for me, it's about letting a player know that I genuinely care about him as a person first, so whether he comes through and stays in the national team, I've got guys that I coached with at academy level, John Fisher, who's now coaching in Queensland, Alex Corbusiero, who's had a fantastic international career, now coaching in America. I'll speak to him every now and then. Guys who I worked with in the academy that are, that will phone me and will speak now. And for me, I think that's a good reflection on the relationship that I built with them. So I think first and foremost is that they understand that I care about them genuinely as a person first. And then on the back of that, building that relationship is that I want them to be the very best player that they can be. So sometimes I'm going to have to give them a message that they don't really want to hear. You maybe haven't been picked. Or that there's an area that we really need to improve, because it's not always good news that you give players. So I think that any news I can give or any information, any feedback I can give to a player, that information will be well received if the relationship's built on trust. So I think that's just be a good human first. Let the player know that I'm genuinely concerned. And that takes time. You've got to find out about his family. Who his mom and dad are. What's his family life like? Where's he now? Where are your family now? You need time. If I look at the Stormers, I think that's something that they're doing so well at the moment. I was in there only for a day, but you get a good feel from their coaching staff, from the guy in charge, John Dobson. I can look at a group and you can see genuine concern for the guys in his care. So for me, that's something I've always tried to do, make the player understand that I genuinely care for him, and he's not just an asset or a player that I need to get the most out of. I think if you're along those lines, Guthrie, if you're heading down that route, I think that's a really good start.
Mm. Yeah, it's so true. But I'll be honest, all the coaches that I've had on the pod and that I really respect the hell out of, and another coach mentioned this, Richie Gray, the Collision King, and he mentioned the same. Yeah, you see, you're not coaching rugby players, you're coaching humans first, and I think that is important. You must never lose sight, and also we need to understand, and I'm going to get my facts wrong potentially, but the Generation Z, they are different. They've been labeled by a doctor in the US, I think, as the anxious generation. Even though they sometimes pretend to be strong, they struggle a lot with confidence, and they are constantly looking for that reinforcement or affirmation, or that social affirmation as well. Okay, you're doing this well. So I do believe as coaches, you can't treat every single player the same. You can't have a rigid mindset. You really, and you mentioned that you really got to take time to get to know the player, what makes him tick. I always used to make notes, and I used to won't say profiling players, but I would write any important notes down. Like in the week, if I saw something, how did that correlate to his performance? So I always have a philosophy, when I come to coaching, and it's something which I've developed over the years, which is called the Scrum Dominator mindset. And one of the first key steps of the Scrum Dominator mindset is that it's not just about identifying, okay, what drills should you do? What technique should you do? It's about identifying the source of what's holding you back. And I think that's sometimes where we get it wrong as coaches. And I'm just speaking in general. We see a player not performing. We're saying, that's not good enough. All right, next one. And I'm saying that's not the case. You need to assess the player, see where he's at, what is he capable of doing, but rather asking the most important question. Why is he not performing? And how can I help him? So I think that is crucial. And, Neal, there's so many things, if you have to compare players today and you have coached players through different generations, you've been involved both over years and international scene. What makes the players today different, good and bad?
That's a great question. I think, like you said earlier, I think the players today, the self-affirmation, you see guys, and I speak to other coaches, they get in after a test match and the first thing they do is check social media. Does website X say he's given him 7 out of 10 or 9 out of 10? And some of the guys place probably more validation on that than they do, the forwards coach or the backs coach sitting down, patting him on the back and say, outstanding. That was an unbelievable performance today. Congratulations. But he's probably a bit more concerned that, some websites giving him 8 out of 10. So yeah, I think the young ones, you're right, G, are a lot different. They have so much more information at their fingertips. Like we said a little bit earlier, where they've got people who can go, you were good, not good, good, not good. When I played, there were no mobile phones. So you didn't know how people felt. You just had the coach. I had Ian Mack who'd say to me, good or not good. This is where you need to get better. So I had one guy telling you, and then your mum or dad always probably tell you were very good, and they'd lie to you to make you feel a little bit better if you didn't have a good game. I think it's harder now because I think the young players demand more. They demand more. Coach me, make me better, give me more information, I think this is where, like the importance of senior players in your group. So Japan is so fortunate. Mike Leach, we've got a guy called Mike Leach, who's played, he's an unbelievable rugby player. I mean, unbelievable. Won Super Rugby with the Chiefs. He'd be close on 100 caps now for Japan. And Leachy doesn't say so much. He coaches by doing. Like you said there, he sits down at the front of meetings, everything like that, and he's got his book and his pad and his ruler, and he makes notes, and I watch him, he'll come to me or come to Owen in the week. I need to practice this, please. I need to swim off defenders better to get, to second line of attack. And I think having men like that, trying to keep hold of men like that in your playing group is so important, because for us, I don't have to say to the young player and spend, an hour talking to him. I can say, just watch him for 2 days and then come back and tell me what you see. I've done it with a few young players and they come back and they go, geez, okay, he's the most prepared. He comes in an hour before training and he stretches. Is that because he's older? No, that's what he does. So we're fortunate that we've got, 1 or 2 players like Leachy. We've got 1 or 2 others, but Leachy's been really important for us. At Bath, we had players like that. So I think those guys, helping those young players understand, use how a coach can use a senior player, a really, really good senior player, to help a young playing group. The rest of it with young men, again, is just, I think the hardest part is getting them to understand that, you genuinely want to help them. You're not just a friend, because you have to be more than a friend. Like I said, you have to give them bad news or things like that. So again, building that relationship to make them understand that you genuinely want them to be the best player they can be, and helping them understand who they need to listen to. Of course you're going to read things and see things. There's more information available than ever before. But who do you place your opinion in? So you can have 20 people speak to you, but if Guthrie comes to you and talks to you about your scrum engagement, you need to listen to him because he knows what he's talking about. The guy down the road doesn't. So I think getting them to help them understand who they place value in opinion and things like that, that's really important as well. I think that, that's key.
Yeah, I think it's different. Something I always tell players, I really feel for them. And because, you mentioned there when you played, there wasn't social media. And even myself, social media only really took off towards the end of my career. In the beginning, it was just about posting a photo and putting out a tweet back then. But now, you make a mistake, that clip goes viral on social media. And it's almost sometimes I get the impression players are playing, we call it in French, appréhension. They sometimes scared of making mistakes, so they don't want to make a fool out of themselves. So sometimes they tend to play it safe, and it's stuff. But what you touch based on there, and I think we're talking about what players need to understand, and the younger players don't always get it. You mentioned you have so much information at the tip of your fingers. They are constantly, but I'll be honest with you, back in the day, I was checking the Sunday newspaper to see what my score was when I was a Springbok. So we can't criticize them. But at some stage, you would get someone to stop looking at that. It doesn't count. That's not your coach. And it comes down to what you just mentioned. You got to trust you got to trust the opinion of people that you respect. People that really have your back through the good and the bad. Those are the people that you should be listening to and that really has a vested and authentic interest in you, which is very important. But what you touch base there, on Leach is what he's doing. He's what you call a student of the game. And that's what I'm always telling players. Being a student of the game, it's not just about taking notes, but really taking time, asking the right question. Asking what can I do to improve that? That's what I did back in the day as a player. So in your mind, being a student of the game, rugby players, what would you advise rugby players to do to be a real student of the game?
It's brilliant. Actually, just talking now, a fullback called Ant Watson. So Ant's probably one of the best players I've ever worked with, if not the best. In terms of, I started working with him, he was nearly 13 years old, through the academy, all the way through to Bath, international level. And Ant was a genuine student of the game, because he would look at how he could get better. He'd look at his warm-up. He'd go to games and I'd say to him, well, watch how he warms up. I watched him once in a warm-up at Harlequins and he just mucked about he thought it was in his head, it was the right thing. And then when we sat down, I said to him, right, what are you going to do in the game? What's your first action? So he's gone, I'll probably maybe catch a high ball. Did you practice that? No. Okay, what if the ball goes behind you? I'm going to have to slide on it, get up, maybe beat the defender and kick it out. Did you practice that in your warm-up, individual warm-up? No, mate. I said, well, what did you practice? And then you could see the wheels turning. And then he's come to me the next day and he's gone, I've written out a plan. So not everybody, if it was that easy, everyone would do it. And just got it. I remember once sitting with him saying, what do you think of the way Christian Cullen would run? And at that point, it's not like Christian Cullen played in 1965. And he said, who? And I sort of grabbed my head. I was like, oh no. Right, go and watch. Go and Google Christian Cullen. Come talk to me tomorrow. And he came back the next day and he just went, geez, who's that bloke? I said, he's probably one of the greatest All Blacks. And then I think those are critical moments for Ant. He then started to realize that he needed to not just watch his game or his clips on a Monday morning, but actually watch the whole game and then watch other players. Who are the best in your position in the world, Ant? Well, I think it's him and him. Okay, well, watch them play. And then he would come back to me. Alex Corbisserie was the same. They're really good players. They're inquisitive. They want to know more. And it's not just what I tell them or what someone tells them. They're really, really good players. George Ford, Owen Farrell, these sort of players that I worked with. These are guys who are really inquisitive about what other teams are doing. What are guys doing in rugby league? What are they doing aerial work in rugby league or AFL? And I think if you can make players inquisitive, I think, Guthrie, what you're talking about there, you make smart rugby players because it's not just you telling them then, they actually go and look, they go and look at different things. So that for me it was a sort of a pivotal moment with someone like Ant was, how do I make players much more inquisitive, not just about their game, but about the best in their position in the world? What do those guys do that's different? So that, I think that's really important.
No, it's so true. Firstly, I had Anthony Watson. He was actually the first guest on this podcast back in the day when he was still
Really?
distance from the game. And he sang your praises. He spoke really highly. So well done on that. It's guys like you that make players like us achieve, great things and really achieve all those great accolades. That's so important. We as coaches, we have that role. And he actually mentioned that it was something which was very important. And I always tell this to rugby players, which he shared. And he said this, the main thing needs to remain the main thing. And he shared his own journey, when he had his Achilles tendon tear and he was in a few months into rehab. Then he went to go do a photo shoot. He caught the ball and then
NFL,
he ruptured it again. He ruptured it again. So it was brilliant. And I always tell, and that's the great thing as well with working with academy players. They're like sponges. And I would tell the guys, because I've picked up an environment I was in for the last 4 years. A lot of players are not watching their own games. They're not real students. And I would tell these players, be a student of the game, and that's often the case about players who are really purpose driven. They are really to go above and beyond, understand it. But then you get the players who are just happy to get that paycheck. So they do their training session, they get in and out, but then you get players that are staying there behind. But Neal, I've got a question for you, because this is something which I've been asked quite a bit. I just recently finished the 8-week cohort with 13 scrum coaches across the world. I took them through my course. It was brilliant. Listen here, who thought I originally planned just having a 45-minute to 50-minute call each week, and each week it would go an hour and a half to 2 hours talking about scrums. But a question that came across a lot, and this doesn't just apply to scrummaging, it applies to everything. Often as coaches, when you got a player that's invested, that's great. It's brilliant. You can work with him. But sometimes you do get confronted with a player that has a bit of an ego, and that might be borderline arrogant at times, even though in a collective environment, we try to sort that out. But sometimes you might be dealing with a player like that. And I'll be honest with you, I wasn't the most easiest player, so I can't judge these guys. I know, I remember back in the day, we had Barley Swart coming. I gave him a hard time, when he was coming into the Bulls setup. And even towards the end of my career, I had a great chat with Ugo Mola. And I said, listen here, sorry, I know I was difficult towards the end of my career. But as a coach, how do you deal? I've got my opinion about it, but how do you deal with players who have big egos and that kind of tend to be a bit stubborn?
Again, I think it comes down to the relationship that you build with them. Being able to put yourself in a position where you can give them some honest feedback. I think probably one of the things I remember, Eddie organized a chat with Alex Ferguson, a legendary Man United manager. And I think that what he said was, if you can't change the people, change the people. And I sat there and I thought, what was he talking about? Like, he said, if you've tried your utmost, and you've, maybe what this guy needs is to be sent away for a little bit. I'm not saying that's what you do first, because there's so many more steps before that. But it was just a different way of looking at it. His which is, the philosophy is a bit different to mine. Alex Ferguson was saying, look, if I try this guy and I talk to him, he doesn't do what he wants, or I know what the team needs him to do, then he sits out for a little bit. And that was his way of making him trying to realize it. I suppose for me, it's a really good question, is to put him in difficult situations. Situations where he might not be able to achieve as much as he had done without belittling him. Is, you might put him, I'm just thinking about a young prop, Alex Cormiserio, who worked with us, and I gave him a few scrums. He'd said to me, listen, I'm ready to go here. I've been playing a premiership, no problem. And I stuck him up. Do you remember Faan Rotenbach?
Yes. Oh.
And I said, right, here you go. Just deal with Faan for 5 or 6 scrums. And you could see he got a little bit of a bashing. And then we sat afterwards. He said, right, now what happened there? And he's gone, geez, now I got my pants pulled down. Why? And I think the first thing to try and get the player to realize is that you're probably never as good as you think you are. You're also never as bad as you think you are sometimes. But just get the player to understand where he is. As a young man, where are you? Are you at this level? Because if you are, you'd be playing for France or you'd be playing for South Africa. You'd be starting. You wouldn't be here in the academy, or you wouldn't be in the second team. You'd be starting every week. So there's already some feedback for you there. It's just to try and get them to understand where they are first and foremost, and then sort of address it from there. But I think it's becoming more and more prevalent in the game where young guys have maybe a false perception of where they are. And I think, Guthrie, for a lot of guys, it's not because they shit blokes. They maybe just don't understand. They just never had anyone go, right, sit down. This is where you are, young man. You're not at this level yet. You can be. We can definitely get you there, but it's going to take step A, B, C. So I think being able to have that conversation is really important. Get them to understand where they are. What is the gap? How do I fill the gap? I'd say it's probably the best thing that I would say.
I totally agree with you. I think that's so important. It's not just about discarding a player or sending him away. You got to understand. I always say there's a reason why a player is like that. That's maybe sometimes, in most cases, it's a player's way of protecting himself. He puts up this barrier, it's his defensive system, and sometimes he just doesn't know better because for years a coach would let him be the way, and he needs to change. And I think comes down to fundamentally what you said. It's about understanding the player, building a relationship with the player, having its rapport, and showing that you really genuinely can. If all else fails, then potentially you have to take on the approach of Alex Ferguson. You got to make a change. And sometimes it's good to teach them some lessons of humility as well, but not going too harshly about it, creating conditions at training, in a subtle way. So not just directly targeting a player.
Sorry, if I can just jump in there. Yeah. Sorry, guys, just something that Gary did. I think just everyone goes, be honest. Let's have an honest environment. And people say that a lot, but they don't really want, that brutal honesty. Something Gary did when Gary first got to Bath, the players all said, the previous coach wasn't honest with us. We want honesty. So Gary was like, okay, all right, guys. So brutal honesty. Yes, we want this. Okay. One of the first things he did, we ranked every player. So we had 4 lucets, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we sat them all in a room. So all 4 lucets, and Gary went, you number 1, you number 2, you number 3, you number 4. This is why you're number 1. This is why you're number 2. This is what you need to get better at. This is why you're number 3. And then the guy who was 4th was like, well, I think I'm better than him. And Gary was like, that's fine. You think that? Me and Hats, we pick the forwards. We don't think that. This is where we think you are ranked currently. We think we can get you to here, but this is what you need to do. But he did it in front of all the loose heads. And you could see the guys, it was uncomfortable for them, because you're being told in front of your peers that we think he's better, or we think you 4 out of 4. And we had a loose head, a guy called Paul James, who was genius senior player for Bath Rugby. Welsh, played 70 times for Wales, 70-something times for Wales, who was brilliant for our club. And Paul James grabbed me afterwards and he said, geez, I've never experienced that before. I said, was it uncomfortable? He said, well, it's a little bit. But he said, now everybody knows where you are. Like he said, you guys picked me at number 1. He said, I'm nervous because now you've told all these guys, he's the guy that you need to knock off top perch. This is how you must do it. And, we gave them all the information where you need to be better. So he said, no, I'm motivated now to get out and train harder and to be better because I don't want to be number 2 or number 3. And the guy who was number 4, he came to see us. He said, well, I still don't agree. And I went, that's fine. But that's what it is. That's the fact. This conversation, I won't change that. You're number 4. We want to do everything we can to help you to become 3, then 2, then 1. So that for me was a real big moment in my coaching, how Gary addressed, and he did that 1 through to 15 with every player. So, there was never any discussion in the corridor, he's not picking me because of this, because everyone heard it. All the loose heads heard, this is why. So I just saw it as genius coaching moment.
It's brilliant. He mentioned as well, and in the previous pod he was on with us, and he spoke, when you're speaking to players, when you're having those one-on-ones, you got to base it on facts and not just opinions or feelings. Sometimes coach, I can't explain to you, that's just my choice. And, it definitely resonated because when I would sit down with players, and often it's tough, when you're a scrum coach and you're not the head coach, and, you can't always tell a player, this is the reason, there's other reasons he might not be playing. But then I would tell them, this is where you're standing scrum wise at the moment. And it would be actually sometimes interesting to see, I would all call the players would suffer from what they call a condition, Instagram reality. And you mentioned it there. So Instagram reality means you think you're better than what you actually are. You have formed this perception in your mind and you believe you're that good, but you're actually not. So instead of telling a player you weren't good enough, so I said, listen, we're going to have a look at your clips. So I obviously created a great coding panel for the scrums, so which allowed me to see every single behavior. So when they walked around, when they dropped down, when they dominated, when they got destroyed. So, okay, let's look at your performance this week. And firstly, you tell me what you think. And then the player said, no, I felt good. Wasn't this bad? Yeah, well, there's one scrum. But then he 50% of his post-engage efforts he lost. But he felt he had a good performance and he feels he needs to play. I said, listen, so can you see the stat here? It's 50%. It's like, I don't agree with it. I'm like, okay. I click on the 50% panel. Boom, 5 scrums come up. So, right, you tell me whether each effort is dominant, positive, neutral, or negative post-engage effort. And we went through it. And he looked at it. It's like, no, you're right. I said, okay, I'm just here to tell you the truth. I just want to recalibrate your brain in terms of perception versus reality so that you can move forward. And that's what is key. And it was great to hear the way Gary works and his philosophies. I think that is so important. And that players also know where they stand. You got to be clear on it. But something I want to ask you, and I want to just shift a bit.
Yeah, sorry, if I just say one more thing, sorry, that, what you've done there without sort of tooting your horn, that I don't think assistant coaches, I've done head coach for a little bit and then more assistant coaching, but the role of the assistant coach there to be aligned to his head coach, it is so, so vital. It's easy for you as a scrum coach, and this player's sitting there and he's desperate to do well and he's not happy, and you can go to him, listen, bud, you know what, you probably should be starting. I reckon you should be starting, but it's such an easy thing to do, and you undermine, your whole chain. So I think, your role as the assistant coach there to stay true to the head coach's vision, to stay true to the selection, and to actually support the coaching group and say, listen, I can see you frustrated. I can see you want to do this, but this is the reason, you're not getting picked. So it's easy then not, to fall away from the alignment. And once you do that, you're dead. As a coaching group, you're dead. So I think that alignment is so crucial. And assistant coaches sometimes don't always understand how important, their dedication to that alignment is.
No, but it's a great point you're making, because it is tough sometimes. We have an opinion, but I was very mindful when it came to other areas of the game. If players asked my opinion, I would say, this is my opinion, but I would advise you to go speak to that coach who's in charge of that area. That he giving you the feedback, because I don't want to give any conflicting ideas. And what I felt that worked really well, what I would actually do is I would send the head coach, which I called a scrum report. So every week, I would give a breakdown on what we worked on, what was our actual performance in terms of our KPIs. Did we achieve our goals in the scrum? So when he spoke to players, because obviously I would put forward as an assistant coach who I thought should be playing, and then he would make the executive decision because he's looking at a lot of other things, his players' behaviors, his mindset, his attacking abilities, and that would actually help him. He had this brief summary, not in detail for scrum coach, but for head coaches, they have basic bullet points. And I think that is very important. But Neal, the question I want to ask is that there's a lot of coaches, as I mentioned, I've just finished a cohort with 13 coaches, and a lot of these coaches, have kind of evolved into where I'm mentoring them as well. I'm taking them now through, which I call the coaches operating system. So this is basically guiding them on their journey to really achieve their goals as coaches. And the question comes back a lot, I work with these coaches. They are investing, their own personal money to really chase their goals and their dreams. And the thing where they get stuck, they got the skill set, they got the knowledge. And it's like, I would love to coach at a professional level, but I don't know how to start. I don't know where to get in. And we all know how tough it is. You were fortunate enough. You went as a player straight into coaching in the academy. And I'll be honest with you, when I stopped playing, it was hard getting a professional gig, even as a former player. There was stuff. So I think the big question is, What advice would you give to coaches? And I asked the same question to Gary, so it'll be interesting to get your point of view. What would you advise coaches who know, I do actually have the ability to coach at a higher level, and if given the opportunity, excel at the professional level? What should they do in order to create those opportunities?
Yeah. So I think because the more players come out the game, the more people want to coach. I think probably understanding what you're very good at. So, like for me, I knew I could coach the scrum. So I got into the into the academy system. I was fortunate the way I got into it. I'm not going to lie to you. I didn't maybe wasn't the best interview, but there was, because I'd come out from a long playing career and I'd started doing some coaching work with the juniors. I got an opportunity that maybe someone else should have had before me. I'm not sure. I wasn't part of the interview process. I think understanding, first of all, what you're good at, what are your strengths, and then try and get into those environments. First and foremost, like, if it's a coach who wants to coach at a high school or a university or even a national one club or a premiership, is be proactive. Understand what you're good at, and also try and build up an understanding of what you're not good at. So I'm really good at this. My knowledge gaps are here. This is where I need to improve. And then speak to clubs, try and get into, to shadow. I look at our environment. Eddie's brilliant about we have all the League One coaches come in. We ask, they have a period where they can sit and ask questions. So I think people are actually more giving of their time maybe than guys recognize. So understand what you're good at, what you need to improve, and then go and try and get into these environments. Try and get into the environment, see what people are doing. Speak to other coaches. I think that cohort, having the ability to sit with 13 other men or women, whoever it is, and just go, this is where I am. What are you doing? I think having the ability to listen and to go, shit, but that's a great opportunity for me. Maybe I should look at this. Maybe I should look at that. So I try and encourage young coaches to get into as many environments as they can. They get into these environments, see what other people are doing. What can you take from it? Don't try and take everything. Take what you need. What is it that you want to work on or you're trying to improve at? And then just be proactive. Ask for opportunities, because they don't come along that often. I think asking for opportunities is important. It's hard, isn't it? People look for jobs everywhere.
I can definitely resonate there, and I think what you mentioned there is it's about being proactive and constantly learning. And I really respect the hell lot of those 13 coaches that committed to my course and the cohort. But what was unbelievable is I did this one differently, Neal. In the past, I would always, just present the course. I said, right, we are building this course together. So they are dissecting every single call which I'm doing, and then they would say, go a bit deep into that. Explain more about that. Why do you say this? Why do you say that? So it's not about defending myself. I said, listen, I want you guys to ask tough questions. And it's actually evolved into something which I'm now have created, which hasn't existed before. It's probably going to be one of the most in-depth Scrum courses, in my opinion, not just from a technical point of view, but everything, in terms of philosophy, mindset. But you mentioned there's something, because I do believe for coaches, it's like professional rugby players. You can have the talent. Talent gets you in the room, but what are you doing to keep yourself there? And not all the best players make it professionally, because sometimes you just need a bit of luck, because sometimes there might be a lot of players ahead of you that are world class. They're playing international, and just the first 3 slots are full. You're not going to get you. Sometimes you need an injury or someone to be sick, and that's why it's important to be prepared for that opportunity. But as talking about coaches' evolution, and this is currently where I'm sitting now. I recently, finished up at La Rochelle. Unbelievable 4 years. Great working with Ronan Nagara. Unbelievable coaches. I really enjoyed. But as a coach, I realized, and I'm watching your journey as well, how you evolved from being a scrum coach, assistant coach, head coach. It's brilliant. So what advice would you give to someone like me that's in this transition period? I want to coach a forward pack. I want to eventually one day become a head coach if an opportunity is given to me. I want to work with great people. What would you tell a coach that is transitioning from specialized coaching, whether it's line-out coaching or scrum coaching, to make that next step? I did my homework from this podcast. I didn't just.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's an unbelievably good question. I think if I just talk about for me personally, I wanted to move. When I finished with England 2019, it's because I loved England's a country of my birth. So, I love that job. Working with England and getting to a World Cup final and things like that. For me, I had an ambition to go the next step. I'll never forget, I sat down with Eddie, and Eddie said to me, "Don't be in a rush." And I said to him, "What do you mean?" I'm whatever, 50, 49, whatever it was. And he said, "Don't be in a rush. Make sure you're in a good position to step forward. What is it you want to step forward into? Make sure you're ready. You'll never be fully ready because there's always things that get thrown up. I think understand that you're not going to get everything right. If I just talk about my journey from assistant coach to head coach. So my first year at Bath, we went unbelievably well. And then we started to struggle. And I wasn't aligned with the director of rugby on recruitment and a few other things. And I didn't push as hard as I should have. And he was a good man. He wanted Bath to do well as much as I did. But there was a misalignment. And when Johan came in, so I'd been head coach, and I sort of moved down from head coach to assistant coach. And I was having a coffee with Johan the one day, and I said to him, "Why did you keep me on? I was the head coach, and now you and the guys might still see me in this role." And he said to me, "No, Hats, I felt in my opinion that you were the best coach for the job, and I want to surround myself with the best coaches. If they're better coaches than me, I've got no problem with that." And that's, I remember sitting there thinking, geez, that's a hell of a statement from Johan. He has a guy called JP Ferreira there, who's a genius defense coach. And he said to me, I can't coach defense. Like, JP's a much better defense coach than me. So I think the humility that he had to understand that he's going to be surrounded probably by better coaches. You're not the smartest guy in the room. There's smarter guys than you, but how you get everybody to work together. Sorry, I've gone a little bit off topic there, but I remember moving from assistant to head coach, thinking that I needed to have all the answers, and I didn't. And that's probably one of the big things that I got wrong, that and the total team alignment. And I think it's something Johan does so well. So I think not understanding that you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be the smartest guy in the room. Employ people that are good people and that potentially are smarter than you. And it's just how you sort of model all of that together. I'm not sure if I've answered. I'm going to have to probably go away and think about it. I don't really have a brilliant answer for it. I wish I had some stunning answer for everybody. But it's such a good question. It's a really good question. I think it was for me, I wanted more of a challenge. I wanted to test myself the next step up. As a player, you did it, you play club, then you play provincial, then you want to play international. You do it as a player. So it's natural to want to do it as a coach. I think probably the best advice I got was from Eddie in saying, look, don't be in a big hurry. Make sure you prepare yourself the best you can be, but understand that you won't be as fully prepared as you think you are.
Yeah.
And then from Johan, it was probably, look, don't try and be the smartest bloke in the room. You won't be. You employ a defense coach because he's a better defense coach than you. And I thought that was something that, the things that I got wrong that I look back now, if I was to do it again, I'd make sure that I changed the way I approached it, how I set it all up. Yeah, it's a good question, G. I'm going to have to probably come back to you on that, mate. I've probably answered maybe a little bit of it, not to the level that I needed to.
No, it's not an easy question. What I'm doing at the moment, I'm preparing my philosophies and my systems. I'm not systems in the sense of being rigid in terms of how I would approach it, and I would choose a team and I see something, all right, so how would I address the situation? What would I be doing? What's the message in the week? What would training look like? Not just in the week, because I do believe in order to change habits of players, you need 4 to 6 weeks at least. And you can maybe give me more insights there. But I do agree with you. You prepare yourself for that next opportunity. Neil, I think,
but just one thing. I think that's like what you've said there is brilliant. Having a very clear philosophy on what you want not just how you want to play, but how you want your team to behave. How you want them to train, how you want them to behave, how you want them to act with each other, how you want them to treat the public. If I think that's such a really good point. If you're really clear on that, if there's some things that are non-negotiable with you, that's important. I think having that put out, and not just in your head, but actually committed to paper. Johan's got this little triangle that he uses. Other people do different things. I write down, I take notes everywhere I go. So like for me, I write
Same.
down, I want my team to look like this. Your team should reflect you. I want my training to look like this. I want how they treat each other to look like this. I think if you're very clear on that, like as you've said there, and you can verbalize that, then I think that's a massive, massive step in the right direction.
Now, you definitely reassure me there, because something I've been putting forward a lot lately, when I do podcasts or I put stuff on social media, I don't do it to get likes or views, because I have a message on my heart which I want to get across, and something, and it just aligns with what you said there. And what I've been telling players the last few weeks, and coaches as well, for years I've been obsessed with the vision or goals, and I still believe in that. But over the last few years, I've realized more. It's about rather chasing the identity of the person or the version that you want to become, and asking yourself, what should that person be doing? What's the skill set that person needs to have? What type of philosophy, what type of habits? That is important. Neal, I've got a few more topics to get to, because I am conscious of your time. I know you're in Cape Town. It's summer. I just got a few more questions, because it's so great to chat to you. Like, listen, honestly, this is an absolute pleasure. Obviously, we've spoken, and there's a lot of things I can talk about. I can talk about the final in 2019, but I would like to talk to you as a coach, and it's up to you to decide. Is there something you can talk about or share with us in the audience? A massive setback or a disappointment, or a time where you really felt under pressure or a bit overwhelmed, a moment of adversity. What was it like? How did you experience it? And how did you get through it?
Yeah. It's interesting though, because, I felt when we lost the World Cup final, I genuinely felt like the world collapsed, because not because we were super confident, we had just prepared so well, and, other people prepared well as well, and that was probably the beginnings of that. That's the Springbok side that's dominated World Rugby the last 8-10 years. So I'm really, when you talk about adversity, people who lose family members, and who live under a bridge or don't have a home, so I'm always conscious about, what is adversity for me compared to somebody who's got a ridiculously tough life. I think probably the toughest period for me was I joined Bath as a head coach. I joined Bath as a coach and then got made head coach. And the first was just after COVID. We came back and we won 10 out of 11. We're flying. We lost in a semi-final to a really good Exeter Chiefs team. And then the following 18 months, it fell apart, like absolutely fell apart. And it was I had a really good coaching group, but they were all young men. Their first guy, Mark Lilly, Ryan Davis, Luke Charteris, Gervin Dempsey, Byron Fields, who was a SNC. We had a little Irish SNC guy, PJ. And these were all brilliant men, but year one in their job. So we didn't have the experience to deal with all the hits that came, and they kept coming, like properly kept coming. We had injury setbacks, and then we got this recruitment wrong, and it was almost just like everything imploding all at once, and we finished bottom of the log, but we got pumped by Saris on a beautiful winter's day where they were fully loaded. Farrell, Jamie George, Makavinapola, Billy, just this ridiculously good team, and we got properly pumped. And I remember going home and like I didn't sleep for about a day and a half, just because people are looking to me for answers. How am I going to fix this? I remember getting home, my wife, Robin, who's such a huge supporter, and she was sitting there going, look, how can I help? What can I do? I can see you struggling. And I just didn't know what it was I needed to do. I got a phone call from Eddie, well, we got pumped by Sarries, and he said, listen, mate, I think he lost to the Bulls or the Reds by like 90 points.
Yeah,
And he said to me,
92-3.
yeah, you probably played in that. He said, I've had
Yeah.
a worse day than you. I just want to put it into perspective. I've had a worse day with you. Just try and stay true to what you're doing. I got some great advice. He was one of the few people that actually phoned me after the game. So I wouldn't say in terms of what other people have to go through, it was a ridiculously tough moment. It just felt for me at that point that the whole world was falling in. I suppose just trying to step back, like if I had it all again, what I would do different. That was a really tough moment. I was lucky, the support that I got, not just that game, but that period. The support that I got from my family was ridiculously important. But as important was the support I got from some of the players. Guys I mentioned him previously, Anthony Watson, guys like Josh McNally, Charlie Ewells was a young man then. And I bumped heads with him on a lot of things. But when I stepped back, I actually realized that he wasn't being difficult because he didn't get on. He was being difficult because he was frustrated and he wanted to try and help the club. The club was so important to him. And he's become the captain there. And I couldn't be more pleased to see him doing so well now. But I think the people that are even, guys like Eddie who messaged me and I could have a chat to, I think that close group of people who are like, you're not as bad as everyone's saying you are. You're bad, but you're not as bad as everyone says you are. I think that probably at the end helped me, just understand and get through that period. The guys that I worked with, people who stayed loyal. You find a lot out about people. That's why I say, I want to go and work with good people, because I found out good and bad there. Guys, players and coaches who are going to prepare to stick with me when things are unbelievably tough. We're going to go, Hats, we trust you. This is tough for everyone, but we're going to help you get through. And there were other people, in and around who didn't do that. And for me, I saw some real true characteristics come out, and I'm so grateful for the experience. It sounds a silly thing to say now because it felt like the worst thing in the world, but I'm so grateful for that experience because it showed me that I can get through really tough moments, but it also taught me the value of friendship and loyalty, because there was people who showed their hand, and I'm still grateful for those guys who supported me and backed me through that.
Yeah, wow, it takes me back. You're talking about those tough moments, and everybody knows the Bulls back in the day, 07 and 09 and 010, but everybody tends to forget about 08. We won back-to-back Super Rugby's in 2009, 2010 Currie Cup. But 2008, we went from heroes to zero. From winning the Super Rugby, we were almost at the bottom of a Super Rugby log back then. And it was tough. And obviously, Heineke moved on as a coach, and we had a new coach, was Frans Ludeke, and which was probably an impossible task for him coming in with all these players, these Springbok players, and being groomed and mentored by Heineke Meyer. That's tough to follow up someone like that. And I remember we used to suffer a lot of losses, and there were times where, like you just mentioned, feels like your whole world's coming down. But what I do remember was, or especially back in the day, we would go to Australia and New Zealand for 4 to 5 weeks. So after game, we would just stay in the team's on our team room at the hotel, and we'd have a few beers and drinks with the coaches, and we'd have genuine chats. Okay, what can we do better? What can I do better? Coaches would ask us questions. What do you guys think? But genuine conversations, and that really allowed us to build something great. That allowed, Frans Ludeke as well to have a better understanding of us. How do we work as a group? And together we found the solutions. But before I come probably to the most important question, and you just hit the nerve there, is that and it's something that's always intrigued me. And I've got my reason, and each team is unique and different. When we see a team do exceptionally well, and then all of a sudden they don't, we've seen that. I've seen that back in the day when I was playing at Toulouse. We won top 14 in 2012. Then we went into this massive dip. We weren't doing well. And you can say the same with the Bulls 2007-08. We can talk about, South Africa. There was a stage we were doing really well. We had a massive dip when I was still playing. I remember 2010 was probably one of our toughest years and worst years in the build up to the World Cup. Then, I look at, you spoke about Bath. I look at La Rochelle. We won 2 back-to-back Champions Cups, and then probably one of our worst seasons last year. But only like the one team that's really consistent in world rugby is Toulouse, and maybe the Box right now. But maybe it's a very general question, and maybe potentially an impossible question to answer. When that happens, what are one of the biggest reasons where that happens in a team? Because each team is unique, and I know the cause of and the root of each problem is different. But in general, what are the commonalities in terms when the team is really going from being probably one of the best and all of a sudden taking a massive? Because it's something we do see across not just rugby but in many sports.
I think you say about preparing like you're number 2 when you're number 1. I think a lot of sides talk about it, but as we talked earlier about Eddie's insistence on standards, things like that. I think is having somebody in your group, because it's hard. When you're winning, like I remember that Toulouse team. When you're winning titles on the bounce like that, you win Europe, you win the top 14 Shield, and you win it well. It's hard not to. I don't mean complacent, but people pat you on the back, and you're like, yeah, things are going well here. Things are going really well. And you take your eye off the ball. I think it's human nature. It is. And everybody will talk about it again. When you're first in the league playing the team that's 14th and you get beaten, and people go, how the hell did that happen? Oh, we talked about being complacent in the week. So it couldn't be that. Well, it's probably exactly that. It's a human condition. So I think having one person in your group responsible for a reminder. Again, I said it earlier, you're never as bad as you think you are, but you're also never as good as you think you are. And I think when you stop preparing like you're number 2, that's when that becomes deadly. One of the things, like I said, with England, I think we win 17 games on the bounce unbeaten, with Eddie. And the more successful we got, the harder things became. It's crazy, to think about, but he would drive just that, the consistency of our coaching, of our preview, of our review. Like, what are you doing? How do you make it better? Don't be complacent. And he actually, we did something about it every week or every camp. We looked for because there'll be little clues everywhere. They're like little breadcrumbs. You'll see them. Guys maybe just drop off on a gym session. Or just it never just goes from that to that. There's always something that happens, and I think just being aware of that and looking for it in your environment is probably so important. And then addressing it straight away, because there'll be it's like rot that sets in. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly, and then it's like, geez, now it's a problem. Now you're trying to address standards in training, or timekeeping, because guys have started to come in a little bit late, but you've let it go for 4 weeks. Now it's become a real problem because you've lost 4 in a row. I think being cognizant of the fact that it's there, it's just started to creep in, step on it, trying to address it straight away. I think that probably for me, I was fortunate enough to be involved in teams, both sides, where we didn't, and it bit us on the backside. Bath was one. And where we did, my first time with Bath under Gary, where we did address it, and with England, with Eddie, where we did address it. And you then might lose one, but you don't have that big drop off where now it's hard to get back. Like you say, that Toulouse example is probably a great one. Under Ugo, they had that huge dip. I remember we beat them at home and in Toulouse, and they got booed off. Bath beat them with a bonus point. Francois Lowe scored the last try, and they got booed off the pitch. Like booed off. And I'd never seen, Toulouse are a good team. And you look at them now, like how they've just, to be able to be where they've been the last 3 or 4 years, just consistently at the top. It's tough, eh? It's a tough job. And I think it's even harder for the coaches and for S&C there to just stay on that standard.
Yeah, I think, if I look back at it now, because I was there when Ugo became the coach of Toulouse, and, following up in the footsteps of someone like Genovese, that's almost an impossible task. And it just shows that's a great example. And especially if you're talking from a club environment, and you need time. If you want to create the right environment and build the right players for the style of rugby, you need time. And I think often, we do see is this we call them the rotation system in France. Coaches get fired left, right, and center. A coach can be coaching 3 teams in one season. In France it's ridiculous. But Neal, I'm mindful of your time, so I'm going to finish off with this last question, and probably the most important question. You have so much experience, and this is what I enjoy about this podcast, speaking with unbelievable people like yourself, and I just feel we can go on for hours. The Springbok scrum. A lot of people have asked me this question, and even though now you have bigger roles in rugby where you're no longer just a scrum coach, you've played a very important role with the Japanese team in the setup as well. What would you say is the reason why the Springbok scrum is so dominant?
Look, I think you first and foremost need to look at the cattle. Like Oxenchae. I mean, Malcolm Marx I watch him in Japan, is a freak. I mean that in the nicest possible. 117 kgs. So they've got ridiculous depth at the moment. I don't think I've ever seen, depth in a forward pack like South Africa have had over the last probably 5 or 6 years. It's unbelievable. The second rows, guys that would play in most countries as the number 1 and number 2 locks who don't get a game regularly. So I think that's important, but I think probably more important than that is, sides have an identity, a national identity. And I think something that Russie's done so well, Eddie did it well with England and he's doing it well with Japan. But if you just look at that Springbok scrum, Russie will talk about, their mindset, a South African's mindset around set piece and defense probably. When I was at school, your scrum, even at school wherever in 1987, your scrum had to pump someone. That was it. And same for your defense. So I think how he's managed to tap into the national, the pride, the mindset, the mentality of this is like probably the one-on-one tackle, and your scrum is where you get the chance to show people who you are. And I think their mindset is just next level. Their mindset to dominate is next level. I speak to Don Human. You know Don from your days there. Don does a brilliant job with them. But I think it gets set from the top down, where they expect to punish you. That game against Ireland, I haven't seen any, and Ireland are a good scrum. I can tell you Porter, Sheehan, Beelum, Tad Furlong, Tag Byrne, James Ryan. These guys are proper international players. But that period of scrums that they just kept calling, I mean, they weren't doing that to win the game. I reckon they were sending a message to everybody and saying, look at us. Not in a ridiculously arrogant way, but just saying, this is who we are. Like, check our scrum out here now. We're going to use our scrum to absolutely punish people. And I think, that mindset takes a while to cultivate. And I think it's been set out so well from the top down. It's not just, of course, it's about timing and cohesion and things like that. But I just think what Rassie Erasmus has done so well is he's tapped into the mindset and he's tapped into the national identity of South African forward play, which probably disappeared for a while. Those periods that you talked about, the Springbok scrum and Springbok forwards probably weren't as feared as they were, when Frick Dupree and sort of all those guys were playing. And now it's, I think it's just at a whole different level now. I think it's the mentality, the mindset that he taps into with the players that makes a big difference, along with them being very well coached and just super big humans.
It's all the prize and the biltong and the putt and everything. Yeah, it's everything we have in South Africa. Now, I'm not going to. Guthrie,
it's almost like a sort of the cycle just continues, because now, you thought, geez, well, when Kitsoff and Malherbe go and Bongi goes, like, maybe there'll be some reprieve, but then, up steps Wilco Low, up steps Steenkamp, and then like the next guy just in Che. Like, so now it's almost become part of the system. Like, you want to play for South Africa as a front rower or as a lock, like the scrum better be the most important thing that you ever do, so that the whole mindset around their scrum and how it can influence and change a game, I think they really understand and they really buy into. And that what that means is that these next sort of generation of front row, these guys are just popping up now.
I'll be honest, I had a long think about it, and I was thinking about a lot of people ask me, because I do believe that the Springboks do have certain performance facilities which are well hidden in the country, where specialized training is taking place, and which is not available to the public eye. And they're developing these players from a very young age, where they're breeding them and taking them through crucial tests. Now I'm joking, but I think you touch base there. It comes down to the identity. It comes down to, I think, belonging to something bigger, and what South Africa is standing for at the moment. And I think you did spot on in terms of the mindset. And I'm not going to ask your opinion about all the criticism going on about the scrum, the importance. I'm not going to put you in that position. I do see it as sore losers. And I always say, you got to be humble in victory and gracious in defeat. You see a Springbok scrum dominant like that, forget about who it is. It's brilliant. And it's great to show that we can still keep that brutal side of the game, because that was rugby. Yes, we want to play a attacking style of game, but the set piece is still important. But I'm going to stop us there. Neal, we've been going for 90 minutes, man. It's been brilliant. I can't wait to catch up with you in person and have like we say in South Africa, a real lekker chat, and have a good old chat and a good old talk. And just want to say thanks for everything you've done for rugby. You're not done yet, far from done, but a lot of the players that I've spoken to, some that have come into your pod, your name keeps on coming up. And, what you are doing is you are leaving a real legacy, because I do find it hard and hard in the modern game where players really speak highly about their coaches and saying, listen, my coach really had an impactful. And I think some coaches might be too performance driven or too goal driven and tend to lose the human aspect and the importance of the human being in their journey. So congratulations on everything you achieved, and looking forward to what you'll be creating with Japan there as well, with Eddie and Owen. And, thanks for taking the time for joining us. Is there anything you would like to share with the audience? Anything else? Any last thoughts?
No, just to say thank you to you. No, I think having the ability to like this, to just speak casually, was brilliant. Like I said, I'm not a big social media, but I'll probably catch up on a few more podcasts now and maybe start to get an Instagram handle. No, I just first to just say thanks. I really appreciate it. I love just sitting down with people and having a chat about the rugby. I've been so grateful. It's had such a huge impact on my life, and my family's life, and I'm grateful for every opportunity. So then, including this one. So thanks for the time, G. I really appreciate it.
So, Neal, what I normally tell the coaches in the coaches operating system is regarding social media. If I can give you this advice, don't get used to doom scrolling. Go there with clear intent. If you are looking to discover some information. Those just check. Even myself, a lot of people say, hey, G, you're always on social media. I'm not. I even had this discussion with my wife. I'm like, we'll put a post out there with the team. I will clarify the message, but I'm not spending time doom scrolling. So my advice to you would be, it's a great tool. Use it correctly. Be mindful and intentional when you go onto it. And please don't create a fake account to spy on your players. All right.
Definitely not. All right.
All right. Thanks, Neal. Thanks for taking the time, and enjoy your holiday in South Africa. Ciao, ciao.